Welcome to another episode of the Florida Citrus Sports Scouting Report presented by Florida Hospital. We are just weeks away from team selection, but with so many weekly shakeups in the BCS standings, our options for the Capital One Bowl and Champ Sports Bowl remain wide open. I'm here with Stuart Farb, longtime scout, as we sit down and ask him some questions, especially about his experience at the LSU-Alabama game this weekend. As a longtime veteran, what are some things that you've picked up along the way that have helped you become such a great scout?
There are two items, Erin. First of all, and it's probably the most difficult thing, thinking before you open your mouth. You just never know who's next to you, who's beside you, who's right behind you. And you have to remember that you're always a professional representing Florida Citrus Sports in our two bowl games. So you're there to be neutral, you're there to observe, and so you must think before you speak. That's the first thing. And I want to add a second thing that's extremely important, and that is act like you've been there before. Even if you're a first or second time scout, you're not there as a fan. I think that's a difficult concept to get through to a lot of people. We're there representing, again, the bowls. We must be professional, we must act like we've done it before. And you'll notice that the sports writers, for example, the guys sitting there typing on the computers, they're not sitting there going, rah, yay, hello. They're being professional. It's their job. That's what you're there to do. It's a job, actually, representing the bowl.
You had the opportunity to scout the LSU-Alabama game that would have a large impact on our bowl picture. How did you approach going into that game?
With great excitement. Again, this is when it's really wonderful to be a bowl scout. This is a big game for the national picture too, since both teams are doing so well, and it's a great rivalry. The thing you try to look at, and I was able to actually determine, is the level of interest in your bowl. When any team is fighting for number one, even possible playing for number one in the country or certainly number one in the conference, and our bowl picks where we are, the first pick after the BCS, you want to see if they're respecting you as a bowl. We knew that, for example, LSU came here last year, so we wanted to gauge the level of interest to coming back. Now, both teams are very much in the national picture, even for a national championship game. So because we pick after the BCS, we know that they would rather be out in Phoenix playing in the national championship game. That said, LSU kept telling us over and over again how wonderful our game was. They were here just last year. They did unfortunately lose from their perspective, but it was a great game. And of course, Orlando and Florida Citrus Sports shows them and their coaches and their families just a wonderful time. So again, it's important for me and on the other scout to look and talk to not only their fans, but their athletic director, the sports information director, and even ask a direct question. Do you think you'd travel again? Do you think your fans want to come back to Orlando 2 years in a row? And see what their answer is. On the other hand, Alabama hasn't been here in quite a few years. Alabama has a great tradition. We already know their fan base travels tremendously well, and consequently, we have to assume that it would be a come down from last year, where they, of course, this is the national championship, but that they would travel well, and of course, they did travel well to Baton Rouge. It was a wonderful experience. It's the kind of experience any scout would want to go to, and again, it's gauging the level of interest and enthusiasm for coming to Orlando.
With more important games like the LSU and Alabama game on the horizon, we welcome back Chairman Chuck Beverly to discuss the last month of the college football season. Our Capital One Bowl game of the week is Florida and South Carolina. That game could potentially determine the East Division champion. How would that play into our selection?
Well, the loser of that game is going to have 4 losses, so they're probably going to have played themselves out of it. But the winner, they're going to the SEC championship game, so they're clearly going to be a consideration for us and be in the hunt. We've got some great teams from the west side, though, that probably have a little bit of an edge. You know, Auburn, who probably go BCS, LSU, Alabama, Mississippi State, Arkansas, they've all got 2 losses or less. They're all great teams. They'd be good here. And there's some big games left. They're going to decide that, though.
What other games will help shape the West?
Clearly, the Alabama-Auburn game is going to be huge. And I personally think Alabama might beat Auburn in that game. It's because it's at Alabama. But another really big game is at the end of the season, and that's going to be LSU traveling to Little Rock to play Arkansas.
4 teams in the Big Ten only have 1 loss. 2 of those teams, Ohio State and Iowa, play in a potential elimination game in 2 weeks. Are we just waiting for the outcome of that game?
I don't think so. We've got some other big games left, obviously. You know, those 4 teams, you know, Iowa, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Ohio State, there's another team that's lurking right behind them 1 loss away, and that's Penn State. And Penn State's going to probably just have a lot to say about who comes here, because Penn State still has a big game against Ohio State this weekend, and then they finish the season against Michigan State.
Looking at the Champs Sports Bowl, there are a number of teams that remain in the conversation to come to Orlando. Can you talk a little bit about how the Big East will shape up?
Yeah, it's a mess this year. As you know, Erin, they backload a lot of their conference games into the end of the schedule this year in the Big East. So there's still a lot of conference games between the members that are going to decide, the final outcome. I think a big game is going to be this weekend, South Florida at Louisville. Because if South Florida can beat Louisville on a away game, I think they'll position themselves well. And of course, Pitt, they control their own destiny as well.
In the ACC, we're looking at a similar scenario with a number of teams remaining in contention. What are we looking at from that conference?
Well, Erin, you remember earlier in the season, you and I sat here and we talked about the fact that we thought NC State and North Carolina might surprise, and I think they have. They're right there in the hunt. Also in contention are the two Florida schools, Miami and FSU, and then of course you got Maryland and Virginia Tech. Any of those schools could end up in Orlando.
Like Chuck said, it's still anyone's guess which 4 teams could end up visiting Orlando this bowl season. This week's Capital One Bowl Game of the Week is that SEC East Championship showdown between South Carolina and Florida. The Champs Sports Bowl Game of the Week is the USF and Louisville matchup that Chuck previewed. With plenty of big games in the next few weeks, we've got a lot to talk about. We're off next week as we prepare to host the 31st Annual Florida Classic between Bethune-Cookman and Florida A&M. See you in 2 weeks on the FC Sports Scouting Report presented by Florida Hospital.